Chapter 10 Stoves for Tents and Shelters. For camps where wood is available, we both ordinarily prefer the open blaze in conjunction with some sort of a lean-to shelter. Such a campfire takes a part of anyone back to when our earliest ancestor cooked his meat for the first time and rolled in furs, spent his initial night in a shallow cave warmed by the newly harnessed flicker of flame. It is the atavistic memory of this discovery that lifted men above the animals, which is one of the chief urges that draw a lot of us back again and again into the wilderness. A camp without a wood fire, in fact, seems to be no camp at all. Senses neglected in the humdrum of city life expand to an extensive sensitivity under the influences of an honest campfire. The friendly deliciousness of smoke, some of which probably still perfumes your outdoor clothing, seeks you out as you get the camp in order. Then there's the special allure not available in the costliest restaurants that hardwood embers with maybe a slight seasoning of pine impart to food roasted, broiled, or baked over them. The campfire cheerfully shows its superiority too when it comes to toasting yourself or drying your wet clothes. Such a fire costs nothing, and the wood that you have the satisfaction of gathering for it enjoys the added virtue of warming you twice. But in spite of all that can be said for an open fire, there are times when a stove either is necessary or is at least indicated by common sense. You cannot heat a closed tent adequately with a campfire. To accomplish that, you require a shelter of the open type. Yet, with such a biovac and temperatures well below zero, you would be chopping wood a lot too much. At many public and roadside campgrounds, furthermore, no firewood is available. If women are in the party, privacy may make a closed tent desirable anyway. The most popular camp stove. Cooking over an open fire in a heavy rain can be an awful chore and sometimes practically impossible unless a disproportionate amount of preparations are taken. Furthermore, cooks whose whole experience has been with kitchens take much more naturally to some sort of stove, so let us explore the problems and the advantages of the camp stove. The most popular camp stove today is one that uses gasoline for fuel under its 1, 2, or 3 burners. In many cases, the gasoline stove solves the cooking problem admirably, especially when it comes to boiling and frying. A separate oven can be had for baking. This type of stove is ideal and often a must for many public camping grounds. It is good for the places where firewood is no longer to be had and where even space may be limited. It is excellent for those automobile tourists who like to cook their own meals beside the road, both for the pleasure of eating outdoors and because of the very real economies thus afforded. Such a cooking fire can be lighted immediately. The even and easily regulated heat will allow the refugee from the city range to put out good meals with a minimum of effort and guesswork. Such a stove is fine, too, for travelers in those areas where non-residents are prohibited from lighting an open fire except when accompanied by a resident or a licensed guide. Gasoline stoves are inexpensive, easily and compactly packed, and durable. They can be used atop a handy metal stand that supports them at normal stove height and when not in use folds into a small bundle that is easily stowed in the car or boat. Puffers. The one-burner Primus stove has a unique record among explorers, campers, and outdoorsmen. For the past 60 years, it has been used by all Arctic and Antarctic exploring expeditions as well as by at least 90% of all alpine climbers. If you are contemplating a trip into some such area as the rich barren lands, before which the tree line abruptly ends, not dwindling away gradually as might be expected, a compact and light Primus stove weighing little more than a pound will be a good thing to take along. These efficient little heaters may be obtained in units burning alcohol, kerosene, gasoline, naphtha, benzene, and other liquid fuels. A 2 1/2 pound outfit with less than 6 inches of height and diameter may be secured that in addition to the small brass stove includes 2 nesting pots and 2 frying pans, as well as a shield against the wind that blows across treeless terrain. There is also a 24-ounce outfit nesting 3 1/2 inches and 7 inches in diameter that includes stove, 2 pots, pot holder, windscreen, windshields in a combination lid and pan. Wood-burning stoves. Whenever a stove is to be packed into territory where firewood is available, a sheet metal model burning this fuel has decided advantages. You'll seldom see one today in city stores, and they're unfamiliar to campers with little experience, but along the receding frontiers in whose forests you still encounter old-timers, these wood-burning models usually are the only portable stoves ever considered. Such a stove usually weighs a little more than a gasoline stove, and although available in folding types, is generally bulkier. But there is no fuel to transport, and the sheet metal stove is not difficult to carry, even over a portage or on a pack horse. You can cook on it in the rain with a little care. It will safely warm closed tents as well as log shacks. Many sourdoughs we know, as a matter of fact, have no other stove even in their home cabins. It is easy to dry clothing around it. Broiling and toasting over an open pothole can be a comparative pleasure. It is particularly handy for river trips in large kicker-propelled boats that travel the broad and often sluggish streams at the roof of this continent. There, odds and ends of dry driftwood quickly afford concentrated heat, protected from the ravenous winds often howling along such shores. By providing a shallow box filled with sand or some other such base, you can even cook en route. If the stove you select has an oven, and there is usually no good reason why it should not, baking and roasting will be possible. If it is without an oven, a folding reflector baker can be used. Some sourdoughs, particularly in cabins, utilize a drum oven. This is a small metal compartment which is set in the stovepipe. There, it utilizes for cooking and heating purposes warmth that could otherwise escape unhindered up the smoke outlet. Stoves for tents. The standard AWOL tent is best adapted to a wood-burning stove. Such a tent, 7 by 9 feet, is about the smallest that is suitable for this. A 9 by 12 size is better for 2 men because the beds will not be too near the heat. The stove should not be closer than 18 inches to any part of the fabric. The tent should not have a sewed-in floor, although you can get around this by using insulation such as an asbestos mat or a container filled with sand or loam. Rocks by themselves are not so good, for dangerous sparks can slip unnoticed among them. If the stove has no legs and you would like to raise it to a more convenient height, just drive 4 stout stakes into the ground and cap each with an old tin can. It can be set on flat rocks too, of course. In cabins, a pole enclosure about a foot wider all around than the stove and generally about a foot high is often built and filled with rock and loam to provide a base. You see them too propped up on 4 tin cans. Such stoves are provided with adjustable drafts. If necessary, an additional damper can easily be inserted in the pipe. You can thereby regulate the heat to a large extent, but you should never fill a stove of this sort full of wood and then go away and leave it with the drafts open. If you do, it is apt to become red hot in a hurry, and then you may have the stage set for a conflagration. With carefully selected wood, it is often possible to build a fire that will last for 4 to 5 hours. If an all-night fire is desired, someone generally has to get up during the small hours to stoke up. A lot of hunters and trappers live comfortably the whole winter in the frigid north in AWOL tents with small sheet metal stoves. Stovepipe hole. The telescoping stovepipe had best go straight up through the roof. Less effective and more hazardous is the practice of angling the pipe through the back wall by the use of 2 elbows. The outlet should, in any extent, extend at least 6 inches above the peak of the tent. This will not only ensure better draft, but it will also reduce the danger of sparks being blown directly against the canvas. It is often a good idea to top this pipe with an inexpensive spark arrestor, particularly if you may be using softwoods or if you may be camping in the thick, dry woods. There should be a fire guard where the pipe goes through the tent cloth, consisting of an opening centered in some fireproof material which replaces a small section cut from the fabric. This may be obtained from large outfitters as well as from most tent makers. A wire-reinforced asbestos guard is better than a metal one because in addition to being reasonably flexible and more durable, it will not set up a disconcerting rattle on breezy days. This collar may be obtained with flaps that will cover the opening when a stovepipe is not angling up through it. You can also leave the original tent fabric attached at the top so that it can be rolled up out of the way and tied or snapped across the opening. Sheep herder and other stoves. The most famous, as well as one of the better stoves for tents and other small shelters, is the sheep herder stove of the West. This is a rather large article of the box type with sufficient capacity for cooking a meal for 5 or 6 campers. It is about 27 inches long, a foot high and wide, and it has a rapidly heating oven 5 by 8 by 11 inches. It weighs 27 pounds. Any stove of sheet iron or sheet steel will burn out in time, but the sheep herder has a reputation of lasting longer than any other stove made of such materials. The one used on my last winter trip had been providing almost continuous service for 4 years. The only place I know of where you can get the sheep herder stove is the Smiley Company, 536 Mission Street, San Francisco 5, California. These large camp outfitters also have a smaller and lighter stove, 20 by 12 by 12 inches, including a small oven. This weighs only a dozen pounds. Less expensive, it is adequate for 2 or 3 campers. It does not have the longevity of the sheep herder, however. Both varieties come with telescoping pipe. Many of the small stores and trading posts near hunting and trapping country in the continental West and throughout Canada stock stoves of the box type. Many of these are without ovens and measuring about 20 by 12 by 12 inches, incorporate a door to the firebox, and also an adjustable draft. These stoves are also very satisfactory, and for those without ovens, you can pack along a folding reflector baker. 4 or 5 joints of stovepipe, usually not telescopic, come with them. As a matter of fact, the interlocking black pipe sold in light, flat rectangles is easier to pack. Each snaps together to make a single section, narrow at one end and flaring at the other. There used to be a number of folding box stoves on the market, but in this country all but one seem to have disappeared. This still available model is made by Sims Stoves, Lovell, Wyoming. It folds flat to a thickness of 3 inches, and it has a stovepipe. This is a splendid, well-made little stove. Because it is so easy to pack, I believe I would prefer it to the sheep herder for use with a reflector baker if I had to carry it on a horse. One drawback to the stove we've been talking about is that bulky and heavy. They cannot always be sent by parcel post. So, if you live far from a source of procurement, you may have an express or freight bill which added to their cost will make them a bit expensive. A little midget of a stove sold by Herders Inc. of Wesseca, Minnesota is remarkable in several ways. This small contraption, which George Herder calls the French-Canadian icefish house and duck blind stove, is well made of heavy sheet iron and yet is lightweight. Because of the compactness and lightness, Herder's is able to sell it at slightly less than $5 post-paid, particularly because they do not include a stovepipe with it. This will warm a small tent or other shelter very nicely, and there is room on top for using both a kettle and a fry pan at the same time. The knapsack or folding reflector baker, furnished by the Smiley Company, is a natural for baking and roasting with this functionally diminutive stove with the long name. The Yukon stove. We read a lot in fiction about the Yukon stove that, stories say, warms tents and small cabins throughout the whitened wilderness. You'd hunt a long way trying to buy one, for the so-called Yukon stove is a heating contraption made from whatever materials may be at hand. These may be anything from old tomato cans to a gasoline drum. One such stove that we've seen in the prospectors' cabins in the Canadian Rockies consists of an old wash tub turned upside down on a dirt floor. Wood is inserted through an otherwise pot-covered hole in the top. Behind this, a second, smaller opening accommodates a rusty pipe. Scooping away a little dirt from the lower front rim of the galvanized tub feeds air to the fire, making it roar more assertively. Banking this dirt back in place quells the blaze by cutting off oxygen. Where materials are scarce and packs heavy, inventiveness thrives. As one of us suggests in the recently published book, How to Build Your Home in the Woods, a trapper's favorite, because of the inexpensive ease with which a string of overnight cabins can be provided with warmth, is the heater made of stovepipe. Join two sections of knockdown 7-inch pipe so as to make a single 14-inch cylinder. Unless a cabin already has a dirt floor, set this in a large box of sand or loam. Brace it with several rocks. 4-inch pipe may be elbowed out of the top rear of the cylinder. Wire supports are generally improvised to steady this smoke vent. In a tent, for example, 2 stakes are sometimes driven into the ground about 18 inches from either side of the outlet pipe and wire stretched between them to brace this. A flattened section of pipe, bent at the edges so as to fit the top of the stove more snugly, forms a lid that may be lifted for fueling. This is sometimes loosely hinged with wire or with metal clips cut on the spot. An air hole is generally punched on the top. Variations throughout, of course, are many. Make 4 or more cuts with a can opener or axe, apple pie fashion, in the lower front of the cylinder. Push these flaps outward to accommodate, for instance, a small baking powder tin open at both ends. Care should be taken to clench this can securely in place. The lid of the small container can then control the draft. Some bushwhackers use a cover punctured with nail holes for medius draft, providing that one may revel in every comfort of home by merely exercising the little gray cells.